Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of our Tales from Tech Support. In today's episode, my team has a nemesis. My job should not involve nudity and lasers. SFW, I promise. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. My team has a nemesis. This isn't my first time posting in this sub. Up until now I've mostly posted about funny stories or bizarre incidents, but this is a wholly different beast. It's also really long. I'm a senior network engineer working in a secondary school in the UK. My team consists of 5 members, myself, another senior engineer, Rob, a support technician, Andy, our new apprentice, Tyler, and a teacher from senior leadership, Kat. Kat doesn't do much within the team with regards to IT, but acts more as a line manager to make sure we're meeting targets, and to meet with the governors on our behalf. I've not mentioned the structure of the team before, but in this story it's particularly relevant. Names have been changed to keep people anonymous. On to the story. About a year ago a new IT teacher started working at the school, who I'll call Mr. X, for simplicity's sake. As he joined when schools were shut, due to what's been going on in the world, we didn't get a chance to meet him in person, so at first all of our interactions with him were via email or Teams. The emails were all what you'd expect, nothing out of the ordinary. One day Mr. X emails and asks about Power BI, since he had just heard about it, and wants to use it to do things like track student grades, etc. I email back and say he's more than welcome to use it. We're a 365 school, and the basic version is included in our volume license. I do however advise him that the school already pays for a software called 4Matrix that is specifically designed for schools' performance data, and that all of our staff use. He replies that he had training on 4Matrix when he started, but thinks Power BI would work better. On this point I personally disagreed, but didn't say anything as maybe he just had a preference. I didn't think anything more of it, until a few weeks later Mr. X emailed in asking for the full version of Power BI Pro for all staff. He says he showed his data tracker in Power BI to the deputy head and told him it would work better if all of the staff used it. The only problem being that for users to share their work in the program they need Pro. So I sit down and run the numbers. Every teacher would need it if it was going to replace 4Matrix, so that would be over 100 staff. Even with the massive discount we would get from being an education institution, the cost of Power BI Pro for that many users was more than double the cost of our 4Matrix license for the entire school trust, not to mention needing to purchase more Power BI licenses than we would need in case staff numbers change. Combine that with training all staff on a new system when they're all already used to the other program, and it just seems a bit ridiculous. So I had a meeting with the deputy head and Mr. X over Teams where I laid out my above points and the DH, very rationally, said no way to Mr. X's request. A week later I got a Teams call from Andy. The gist of it was, I just had a weird call from Mr. X. He says he wants me to log into our 365 admin console and screen share with him. Apparently he's been on the phone to Microsoft, and they've said that Power BI is cheaper for schools, and you were looking in the wrong place for the costing. This boils my blood for a number of reasons. 1, he's not believed me when I laid out the facts to him. 2, he's gone behind my back to another member of my team and implied I don't know how to do my job. And 3, he wants to view a secure console that he shouldn't be going anywhere near. So I ask Andy to call Mr. X, and then add me in. He does, and I ask Mr. X to explain himself. The response I got was to the effect of, well, I phoned Microsoft, and they said it was only X amount per user for schools. Me, yes. That is true. Okay, do me a favor. Is that per month? Knowing full well it is. Mr. X, yes. Me, okay, now times that by 130. Now times that by 12. That's the same figure I presented to you in the meeting with the deputy head. At this point he left the call without saying anything more. A week later was the beginning of the summer holidays, so we didn't hear anything more from him. Until September came around and schools reopened. And that is where things began to escalate. Every day we received at least one email from him into our help desk, all with the same subject: send a runner. No details of the issue, nothing typed into the message itself. More often than not, it was something that did not require a physical presence, students forgetting passwords, etc., which, considering the global situation where we need to limit contact, was becoming quite distressing and frankly rather annoying. I logged a complaint about him to senior leadership over the emails, and a week later we started to only receive one per week, and all written to include the issues in the email. However, this then invited a different problem. He was sending emails at the end of his lessons, so by the time someone replied or attended, if needed, we were too late. E.g., kid forgets a password, needs a reset. By the time we get the email, the lesson is over, and the student had been sat doing nothing for 2 hours. We send the new password back to Mr. X, and he can't tell him what it is since he's teaching a different class. Or, email received saying monitor not working. Andy goes to the room, there's a completely different class there with another teacher who tells him, oh yeah, that one over there was switched off at the plug, but I just turned it on myself. Again, this starts to really annoy me, so I keep a log of everything. Around the end of October we refreshed a number of our staff laptops, so as part of that I had to retire the older devices. Mr. X's laptop was only a year old, but I decided to give him one of the new ones since he teaches IT and runs a lot of specialist software. My logic being, maybe doing something nice for him will get him to lay off us a bit. Nope. For context, his office is inside a metal pod. I've mentioned these before in another post here, that kills Wi-Fi signal. Because of this, my team installed a number of Ethernet cables and ran them to each desk, and told all staff in those offices to use Ethernet on their laptops when in the office. What, dear people, do we think Mr. X did after getting the brand new laptop? Why, he never plugged it in and ran 5 speed tests a day on the Wi-Fi, while in the office, and sent screenshots to all of us. For 2 whole weeks. Rob at this point was getting annoyed and took the laptop to test it in the pod. On the Wi-Fi, 7.65 megabits per second down. Plugged into the Ethernet, 987.14 megabits per second down. I've memorized those numbers, and I doubt I will ever forget them until the day I die. Another complaint logged against Mr. X. December rolls around and for about a month and a half Mr. X has been suspiciously quiet, so I'm assuming that the complaints have finally done some good. Until the last day of term, when I was covering for Andy on the help desk, and Mr. X decides to pay me a personal visit. He puts down his nice new laptop and says that he's trying to install software on it, but it's not letting him. I explained that our group policy stops anyone that isn't an admin from installing software, so I'll have to do it for him, which I'm happy to do. As I'm installing the software, the following conversation occurs. Mr. X, you know, I've had nothing but problems with this laptop. Me, excuse me? Mr. X, well, it's just not very good. I had loads of issues with the Wi-Fi and now software. Me, the problems you had weren't to do with the laptop. Your network card is so good you get almost a gig on a hard line. It's got an i7 and an SSD, as well as 8 GB of RAM. No one else with this model has complained about it. Objectively, this is the best device in the school. Mr. X, F***CK off. Me, you know what, you can install the software yourself. Mr. X, what? Come on, man. Me, no. You think you know more about it than I do? Well, then you can fix it yourself. At which point I promptly logged out, stood up, walked off, and made yet another formal complaint. After this I had a meeting with the head, whereby he informed me that they were going to be putting Mr. X on probation. He also told me something very interesting, that Mr. X had expressed interest in Kat's job, and that he wanted to line manage my team. My response to that was that, in no uncertain terms, if Mr. X ever got that job, I would be handing in my notice that same day. The head then reassured me that he would never consider Mr. X in that role since it was clear that he had not been respecting my team. Here was where I thought it had ended. After the Christmas break, schools did not reopen and classes were held over Teams. We didn't receive a single email from Mr. X in this time. Bliss. In this time, the government very kindly donated the school some money for new laptops for students, and we also purchased some new devices as part of our refresh plan. The closure was actually good for us since it gave us time to set them up. Every department got at least 32 new laptops to use in lessons upon their return. Monday this week. I send an email to departments telling them about their new laptops, and saying that they need to come and sign the forms to get the keys to their cabinets. I will be out on the help desk all day with the forms and keys. Everyone shows up. Everyone except one person. The next day we got an email from the deputy head saying that Mr. X wanted to collect the key from him and not us. Petty. But as long as he signs the paperwork, I don't care. We then get an email from Mr. X. If these are for my department, can you install the following software on them? I'm one step ahead. Good morning, Mr. X. As these are for your department, this software has already been installed on every device. Thank you, and I hope you have a nice day. No further response about the laptops. However, over the next 10 minutes we received 3 emails from him, all saying desktop missing G key. Later that day, we get another email from Mr. X. One of the new laptops is saying no logon servers when a student tries to use it. Can these all be checked, please? And he CC's in the head, deputy, Cat, and one of our governors. Because of course he does. I then put Tyler, my new apprentice, on the job. Tyler spends the entire rest of the day logging on each of the 32 laptops and testing all the software and the internet. It turns out the no logon server error was because a student had accidentally turned off the Wi-Fi on that one laptop. Tyler emails Mr. X back and says that he can come and collect the laptops from the help desk as they have all been checked. Thursday morning Mr. X shows up and then proceeds to take every laptop out, one by one, and log them in front of Tyler without saying a word. Once he's done, he finally speaks and says, "I just wanted to make sure they were actually done," and walks off with the trolley. Later that day we get an email from Mr. X with a screenshot of a laptop. The others are all download speed 100 megabits per second or higher. This one is 40. I'll bring it down after this lesson. By the time he brings it to us, it's back up to a normal speed, as when he checked it, it was downloading a Windows update. Last thing on Thursday we get a message from Kat into our Teams chat. Kat, hi all. I've had repeated reports that, since Monday, 2 of the computer rooms have had profile and image issues. Can someone check them first thing in the morning, please? Me, hi Kat. We've not had anything like that emailed into our technical address. Those rooms were open to key workers' kids over lockdown, and we didn't have reports then either. Rob was also in those 2 rooms yesterday installing software for Mr. M, and didn't notice anything wrong with any computer. What do you mean by profile and image issues? Kat, interesting. I've had emails to me personally from Mr. X about the rooms saying the computers weren't working because of profile and image problems, but he was really vague. It seemed like he just heard those 2 words somewhere and didn't really know what they meant. Me, thanks Kat. I'll get Tyler or Andy to check them, but I don't think there's anything wrong. Could you forward me those emails from Mr. X, please? As I'm on my way out of the building at the end of the day, I walk past Mr. X and hear him talking to another teacher, complaining that since he signed for the new laptops he now needs to check his ones weekly for damage, and that he thinks my team should be doing it and not him. I can say with utmost certainty that I am now 110% done with this man. F***ck this man. I'm still logging records of his behavior, as are the rest of my team, but at this point I don't know if reporting him anymore is even going to do anything, as it's now been a year, and he's still acting the way he is. He's the Thanos to my Avengers, the Darkseid to my Justice League, the John Doe to my Mills and Somerville. Our nemesis. F***CK this man. My job should not involve nudity and lasers. SFW I promise. Please be gentle as this is my first ever post on here, and it's a long one, maybe even of epic length, but I think it's also a story that needs to be told. About 7 or 8 years back I was working as the entire IT department for a small chain of medical clinics in the Pacific Northwest US. This chain of clinics was a boutique service where they catered to wealthy patients, and were trying to add new cosmetic services in addition to the regular care offered. To that end they got themselves a fancy new laser-assisted liposuction machine. This machine had a laser attached to the tip that would melt fatty tissue without interacting with surrounding muscle, veins, or connective tissue. It meant they could feed a much smaller tube into the incision and suck the liquefied fat out while doing significantly less damage to the non-fatty tissue, resulting in less bruising and a way faster recovery. Very cool. Now this particular machine was made by Palomar, and the surgical tips with the laser emitter were proprietary to Palomar, and had an RFID chip embedded in each one with an ID number. Before the machine would activate you had to scan the RFID chip, and once the machine verified that you had a valid tip, it would activate for a few hours to allow you to perform the surgery, then deactivate that serial number, so no one could reuse the same tip in 2 surgeries, and to validate the part was a genuine tip from Palomar and not some knockoff part. Now just before they were going to do their first live procedure, Palomar sent a firmware update for the liposuction machine, and by sent I mean they literally mailed an old-school clunky compact flash card with the update on it. It was at this point that I became involved in this circus. The CEO called me and told me I needed to install the firmware update on the new liposuction machine before its inaugural surgery. Now, like most IT guys for smaller operations, I am a generalist by necessity. I've done everything from physical infrastructure, to migrating physical servers to virtual machines, to user-level support, to running project management on developing their in-house electronic medical record system, building business analytics with SSRS. But laser-assisted liposuction machines is WAAY outside of my wheelhouse. I explained to the CEO that there is in fact a very specialized breed of nerd you use to service and maintain expensive computerized surgical equipment, and those nerds make significantly more money than my variety does, to reflect the very specialized training they have received. He responded, it's designed so doctors can figure it out, you should be fine. So I shrugged, took the clunky memory card, and went to find the flesh-melting laser. True to his word, it was not a complicated procedure. Big clunky card slot in the back of the machine, fit the big clunky card. I plug the card in, plug the machine in, and turn it on. On powering up, the machine booted from the memory card and loaded the firmware update automatically. I watched the various load messages, no obvious errors pop up. It finishes its install and instructs me to pull the card out and restart. I follow direction and lo and behold, the machine boots up to a fancy full-color menu. Hooray, that went pretty easy. I thought, but this was not my first rodeo, and while I don't know anything about laser-assisted liposuction machines, I do know not to trust a patch in a production environment without some testing first. So I go to the doctor who's supposed to be performing surgery with this thing in a few days, and I said to her, "Hey doc, I've got that update loaded in the Palomar machine. It looks like it went fine, but I don't really know what fine looks like on there, so you should definitely turn it on, activate a tip, and make sure the laser is working, that it's sucking and doing all the things it's supposed to do before you actually try to use it." She assured me that she would, and I left and went on with my life blissfully unaware that she'd lied. A few days later, I'm having a regular boring day when I get a panicked call from my CEO that I'm needed in the new operating room right now. My heart sank, and I knew I wanted no part of what was about to transpire. "What's going on?" I asked. "There's something wrong with the liposuction machine, and we need you to take a look at it." I am not remotely qualified to troubleshoot a laser liposuction machine. I replied, I'd have no idea where to even begin. You're all we've got, so get in there and try. Dutifully, I went. When I arrived, there was a naked woman laying on the operating table. She had a sterile drape over her for modesty, and hovering over her with the Palomar machine was the doctor and her nurse in full surgical gowns, masks, gloves, the works. I, on the other hand, had no earthly business in that room in my business casual attire and beard. Now the naked woman had already been prepped for surgery. That doesn't just mean she was naked and sterilized, oh no. When you go in for liposuction, they prepare you by injecting large amounts of saline mixed with lidocaine into all the tissues they intend to remove. The lidocaine numbs the tissue and saline is injected to bloat things up, loosen the tissue, and create room and pressure for the vacuum hose and surgical tip. Even if they do nothing more than prep you, you're going to be numb, bruised, and spend days recovering, so it's not a small thing. Once you've prepped the patient, you're pretty committed to doing the surgery. Trying to sound like this was the most normal thing I'd done all day, I asked the doctor, "What's going on?" "The tips won't activate," the doctor replied. "I wave it over the sensor here, and it just does nothing." "All right," I answer and walk over to the table to look at the machine. Looks pretty normal to me. She's deeper into the menus than I'd ever gone when I did the update, but there's no warnings, no errors. The fans are humming, everything looks like it should be working as near as I can see. I reboot the machine and ask her to try again. I have no idea how to get to the part where it activates the tips. She navigates the menu to begin the surgery and waves the tip over the sensor. Nothing. "Have you tried another surgical tip? Maybe that one is faulty," I say. "I really don't want to do that." She says, "We'll have to discard them both when this is over if I do." "I think we're kind of at the point where you need to try it," I reply. So, she gets another tip and waves it over the sensor, still nothing. I shut the machine down, plug in the firmware card again, and reload the new firmware. Once again it loads smoothly as near as I can tell, and after it boots up again it looks normal, so I ask her to try again with both the tips. No dice. I'm officially at the end of my generic troubleshooting 101 quiver at this point, so I call the 800 number on the machine. I get a Palomar tech support rep on the phone and explain what's going on. He asks me to reboot the machine, to reload the firmware and report any errors that come up during load, and asks me to try swapping out the tips. I dutifully repeat the troubleshooting steps with him because I understand users lie, and you can't trust them even if they tell you they tried it. We get through the obvious stuff, while the poor naked lady is still miserably laying bloated and numb on the table next to me, and I'm doing my best to pretend she's a potted plant that should not be looked at directly. Finally the Palomar rep says, "Okay, I think we need to try to remove and reseat the sensor diode assembly. If you look at the bottom front of the sensor panel, you'll see a release button. Press it down and pull up firmly on the sensor assembly." So I push the button down, give the flat sensor panel a firm tug, and sure enough, it pops right out and lifts away from the machine, dripping clear fluid out of the bottom of the newly released panel and dribbling it all over the floor and my shoes. "It appears to be leaking some clear fluid," I remark. To which the Palomar rep calmly retorts, "That's just a natural byproduct of the machine, nothing to worry about." At which point I reply with growing alarm, "By definition machines do not have natural byproducts. Please tell me what the human fat melting laser machine is leaking onto my shoes." I was pretty sure it wasn't actually human fat, as no one had, as of yet, ever used this particular machine, but I really wanted a straight answer, so I was being a tad hyperbolic at this point. "Distilled water and alcohol. Now please plug the diode assembly back into the machine and restart it," he replied. I did as instructed, and we once again attempted to activate a surgical tip, but still nothing happened. "Yeah, looks like you probably have a bad diode assembly. We'll ship you out another one right away," the rep says. "How long will that take?" I quietly ask, realizing the full magnitude of the situation. 3 business days. He says. Thank you. I tell him and hang up the phone. I motion for the doctor to join me in the hallway, and she reluctantly does so. Waiting worriedly in the hall for a status update is the CEO and head of operations. You get it working? Asks the CEO. I'm afraid not, there's a bad part that will need to be replaced. The new part should arrive in about 3 days. The doctor grows a little pale and says, but I have a patient on the table right now. She's already been prepped. Yes, I know, but there's nothing I can do for you until that part arrives. Everyone looks a little sick at this point, and the doctor groans, I really don't want to have to tell her we have to cancel the surgery. I nodded sympathetically and said the thing I can't understand is how the diode could have gone out in the 3 days since you tested it. I mean, no one has used it, it probably wasn't even plugged in. You did activate a tip after the firmware update like I told you to, right? The doctor looks at the CEO and operations chief and says, we didn't want to waste one, they're like $250 each. Ha, I say and ask in return, and how much would you guys be willing to pay right now to not be in this situation? Then I started backing slowly out of their executive huddle and say, sorry, I can't do more for you, but unless someone has something computer related they need from me, I'm going to go because this is really uncomfortable, and I am no longer useful to this process. Good luck. And fled back to my office. Ultimately, they had to take the patient to recovery and then send her home on liposucked. Luckily for the company, she was a volunteer from an employee's family, not a paying customer. They had offered her the procedure for free because nobody wants to pay good money for the privilege of being a doctor's first solo liposuction. She eventually did return after the part arrived and got her free liposuction. I was mercifully not involved that time. The doctor didn't last another year with the company, and as she was the only one they'd paid to have trained for liposuction, the machine ended up collecting dust in a closet. I ended up sticking around for another 5 years before finally moving on to saner pastures.